Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast, brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. It is Saturday the 4th of September and you're joined by myself, Philip Nothard.
And me, Curtis Hutchinson. This is episode 46, season 7 of Motor Trade Radio, bringing you all the chatter that matters. And once again, we've gathered together this week's big car retailing stories across the franchised and independent sectors for you to enjoy all in one place, on demand, on your podcast feed.
So, I mean, last week's show was a very busy show, wasn't it, Curtis? I think we had a lot of stories hit that week, and we had Darren giving a fantastic update in terms of context behind the latest movements from Cap HPI, and we had a menable moments with Steve Whitten there as well. So we got a little bit crammed into last week's show, didn't we?
Yeah, and it's if you didn't catch last week's show, it's definitely worth revisiting, heading over there and listening to it, because we did speak to Darren at length about the movements in used car values, so that's all still highly topical, so do head over and catch up on that. Definitely. So if you do want to come on the show, and like I say, Darren comes on once a month giving us a quick update. We've had other interviews, and if you've not heard some of them, there are some brilliant interviews that we've had this year alone already. But if you do want to come onto the show and you do want to sort of share some of your thoughts on the market, any sort of announcements you want to make, any exclusives, or you just want to send us some of your news stories or press releases as other businesses have done, then please do feel free to message Curtis or myself either on Twitter or LinkedIn, or you can send your email into motortraderadio@yahoo.com. So say, if you get any news stories, please do send them in to Curtis or myself, and we'll try and get them on the podcast. We've got an exclusive this week from eBay Motors Group. So we'll have a sneak preview of their latest digital touchpoint survey research, which actually shows that almost half of car buyers expect their next purchase to be a battery electric vehicle or a hybrid. So stay tuned for that.
So we have got some big headlines, and unless you've been in a closet in a dark room somewhere with no access to anything electric, then we've got some serious... There's been a lot of noise this week, hasn't there, Curtis, with the headlines? Because
last week, as we recorded, we didn't know what was going to happen about the Cazoo flotation, but that's actually happened now. So headlines this week, it has been a busy week for Cazoo as it raises $1 billion from its listing on the New York Stock Exchange. And then a couple of days later, it bought Carvana for £25 million. So we'll catch up on both those stories. UK second-hand car prices surge as pandemic fuels demand. Arnold Clark plans a second dedicated EV innovation centre for customers. This time it will be in England. Jaguar Land Rover buyers are facing year-long delays. And the new eco-petrol is baffling a quarter of motorists, including you, Phil.
It's not an issue at the minute. I've no car, have I, Curtis?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think.
Well, you just be careful when you do get one and what you fill it up with.
I'm more worried about your lawnmower, if I'm honest with you.
Well, not as worried as I am.
So as Curtis has said, I mean, the story of the week, and this was happening last Friday. When Cazoo was being floated on the New York Stock Exchange, and it did happen. And we have actually got a cracking story here, and this is coming from Forbes. And as Curtis has said, British car startup Cazoo raises $1 billion from SPAC merger. So, I mean, this is a great little story, isn't it, on the back of what's happened and why it's happened. And actually, our friend of the show, Mike Allen, is actually quoted in this story as well.
He is, yes, yeah, and it's probably worth just explaining what a SPAC is. It stands for Special Purpose Acquisition Company, And to give that a bit of context, I mean, I do urge you to head over to the Forbes story, because it's great having that US context on a UK and European story. But they say that British online used car dealership Cazoo has raised $1 billion from this reverse merger with billionaire Dan Ox, blank check company, which is the SPAC. It's called Ajax One. So this values the group at $8 billion, which I think is £6 billion. If I think so.
I think that's
yeah. I think there's a typo in the story, and it comes just 20 months after the startup was launched by Alex Chesterman.
Yeah, and I mean, this has been talked about for a while, hasn't it? And there's been a lot of news about this happening, and like I say, it did happen last Friday, and I think the shares had a significant bounce immediately, didn't they? After the announcement of them going on to the New York Stock Exchange, and within 24 hours, I think they'd already risen 7% in the first 48 hours of going live.
Yeah, they were up 6.5% to $9.29. So I'm not sure they went over $10. I mean, certainly last time I had a look, they were under $10. But yeah, I mean, this is a fascinating one, isn't it? And yeah, we do know Alex Chesterman from Love Film and Zoopla. And the way that Forbes spins this story is that the whole point of Cazoo is that Alex Chesterman has seen the success of Carvana in the US, which is the online digital retailer, and he wants Cazoo to be the Carvana of Europe. So this is very much the sort of Forbes take on the business.
Yeah, and we've spoke about it a couple of times with guests on the show that have alluded to their view on Cazoo's valuation before it obviously got floated on the stock exchange, and what that's done to potentially UK AM100 dealerships in terms of their value. But they do talk about that the $8 billion valuation has raised eyebrows from some investors. They say when rival business car dealerships Pendragon has a stock market value of $366 million and Lookers has a market cap of $357 million, and saying that both Pendragon and Lookers each sold around 40,000 vehicles in the year 2020, and that's roughly double Cazoo's sales. While that then talk about obviously that Cazoo is obviously being valued at more money than both of those businesses together.
Yeah, and this leads into an interesting quote from Mike Allen. And morning, Mike. I know he listens to us whilst he's out for his morning run. So the quote from Mike Allen from Zeus Capital is, "It's not intuitive that Cazoo should be worth more than all the other UK car dealers put together when they sell more cars at this point in time. But there isn't a lot of difference in the model right now between a UK motor retailer and what Cazoo does, but they can't compete on marketing because they don't have the same budget." Now, anyone listening to this will be familiar with the Cazoo ads on television, on social media. I mean, they really are punching above their weight. I mean, they've certainly got the name out there.
Yeah, some significant sponsorship going on within Cazoo, but that does kind of lead on to. So I think on the back of him celebrating, and I believe there was some serious celebrations, and I suspect there would be over in looking at some of the pictures over at the New York Stock Exchange there, that when they did float, and very quickly, on the back of that, as you mentioned earlier, Curtis, the story in AM Online, and very quickly Cazoo acquires Cazana. Again, Rupert Pontin, part of that Cazana business, a good friend of both Curtis and I and the podcast, bought for $25 million. And I say very quick off the back there of the stock exchange for Cazoo going public, but that's the Cazana business.
I would suggest they kept the champagne on this.
Yeah, keep that
only
pen.
About 4 or 5 days later.
Yeah, keep inking that pen. But yeah, I
Yes.
mean, Kazana is obviously the subsidiary of Car and Classic, that we know is led by Chief Executive Tom Wood and Chief Operating Officer Chris Varin. But they are remaining with the Car and Classic business. They're not going along to Cazoo with the Kazana business, we're led to believe from the story.
Yeah, that's right. So a bit of background on Kazana, founded in 2012. It's grown to a team of more than 50 staff, and that includes data scientists and engineers. It's headquartered in London, and the company's products include real-time vehicle valuation, pricing, and stock management tools. And this is really what Cazoo were after, that they wanted that expertise in-house, which they will now have with that Kazana acquisition. And it's also worth pointing out that since launch, Kazana has built a data set of over 500 million historic vehicle transactions from over 40 countries across Europe. So it's not just the UK, it's Germany, France, Spain, and Italy. And I suspect this is part of the attraction, because for Cazoo to have the size, the momentum to achieve its aims, it must flourish in Europe. And this will be a major part of this acquisition, this European intelligence.
Yeah, and as you say there, I mean, I'm sure Alex could have sat back and built a valuation tool, possibly without the legacy data that Kazana comes with. But this is about speed. He's moving at such a rate. This is potentially where the valuation has come from as well, the acceleration of growth, not just in the UK, but I think all these stories recently, and even the one with the former Sit in a Car Shop CEO, Jonathan Dunkley, joining in a consultancy capacity, this demonstrates that he is, building very, very quickly. And he's got some serious growth aspiration plans, particularly, and as you say, Curtis, every story recently within anything referenced with Cazoo does reference that European growth. So that's obviously his key focus of acceleration through Europe. But as you say there, got that expertise now from Kazana in terms of that valuation tools and the data that sits within there, and the data scientists and expertise that come with that business, on the back of, obviously, with Jonathan Dunkley and his experience from the car shop and the sit in the supermarket world, what that brings to the expertise as well. So he's seriously getting that expertise now in terms of industry knowledge and knowledge of data of the sector around him.
Yeah, and just recapping on that previous Forbes story, because they mentioned the European used car market, and they estimate it as being worth $690 billion, the European used car market. So you can understand why there's so much interest in developing operations over there from Cazoo.
Definitely. And remaining with used vehicles, we've got the story in the Financial Times there, and quite a few industry experts, friends of the show,
and you
and myself. Yeah, that wasn't including myself there. But an interesting story, and this is UK second-hand car prices surge as pandemic fuels demand, and this is a story by Harry Dempsey, who's done a little bit of research around what's fueling the price surge in used cars. And what is good about it? Well, some people may say it's not good, and it's good and bad in many ways. Is this is now getting more and more in the public arena. Around the prices of vehicles and what's happening in the used vehicle market. Some may say that's not a good thing, because it is possibly educating consumers in terms of the prices of their vehicles and what they should be asking for it. But this does put quite a bit of context around what's happening in that marketplace and why there is this surge in used car prices.
Yeah, and it's the opening of the story is actually really good, because they speak to someone who was on a used car lot looking to buy a car, and making the point that the prices are just too high at the moment. So this particular buyer said he's going to leave it for 6 months or a year and see what the prices are like then. Which if that's
might not change. I think.
We can advise him to just buy now.
There's that. I mean, Darren, listening back to last week's show, I think Darren doesn't see them coming down anytime soon. There might be some stabilisation, but not necessarily a crash. But there is, like you say, I mean, there is context with this around that. What's happening in the OEM world, not just around semiconductors, but raw material supply in general, and then the transition towards electrification that the manufacturers are going through, and what that's doing to the supply of new vehicles, which is then driving consumers that can't buy a new car, or the new car isn't available, and moving into a used vehicle instead, on the back of the ones coming out of the pandemic that are now, wanting to change their car, or actually coming away from public transport and going into a vehicle itself. So there's a lot going on that is changing some of the dynamics, and I think there's something in there that talk about the average asking price for a used car has shot up 15.2% year on year, resulting in a sudden gain in value for most vehicles, and that's data from Auto Trader in there.
Yeah, and there's some great quotes from some of the UK dealer bosses in this story. So our good friend Mark Lavery of Cambria Autos says, "I've never seen anything like this. It's an absolute freak set of circumstances." And he does go on to say that, in reference to his stock levels in August, so stock levels in August were 75% down on what they were in 2019, so pre-pandemic. So it just shows what's going on out there in terms, and it's interesting that, of course, we were talking about Cazoo, the previous story. Everyone's trying to source used cars, and they're just not out there. And there was another interesting quote that caught our eye from our good friend Robert Forrester, chief exec of Virtue Motors, who says the soggiest part of the market is electric vehicle prices. And we kind of know what he means, but we don't understand the soggiest part.
I mean, we do need to get Robert back on the show again soon. Obviously, the interview with him around his exposure on the is it Undercover Big Boss show recently. So I'm not quite sure. I mean, the electric vehicle price market is all over the place a little bit at the minute. We haven't quite got price parity on electric vehicles. We know the volume of electric vehicles is on the horizon. It's been growing throughout the pandemic. There needs to be some stabilisation of both new and used electric vehicles as well against their combustion engine counterparts as well. So maybe he's referring to some of that instability that is taking place there. But maybe we'll get Robert on to talk about the market in a little bit more general and what he means by that. But again,
maybe Phil, it's a valeting metaphor
from his experience.
Yes,
yeah. But I think what is clear, and to all three of those stories, particularly around the Cazoo one and the growth, what we need to remember in all this is without product, you haven't got anything. This is about, there is an asset in all of this. You need stock, you need vehicles, and those are in short supply at the minute. So we are seeing profitability rise through profit margins on used cars. We are seeing some light in terms of profitability around new vehicles because of lack of supply, and therefore target objectives are changing, and some profitability in certain places is returning to a new car that wasn't previously there. But reality is we need stock, and the sooner we can start getting stock into the new car market and subsequently into the used car market, then we'll start to see prices start to stabilise. So hopefully, I don't know whether he can return to that forecourt in another 6 or 12 months' time is yet to be decided, I think.
Yeah, and just a last point on this story, because they speak to another buyer. So Kyle Ashworth, who was hoping to trade in his Ford Mustang that he bought in 2016, and the value of that car had risen from £22,000 to £30,000, but he was put off by the 25% rise in prices for other vehicles he had his eye on. So it does show the dilemma facing both dealers and consumers at the moment.
Definitely. So the next one is an exclusive. So this is from eBay Motors Group, and this, let's say, is the great research that we're seeing on eBay on a regular basis there on eBay Motors Group ahead of the publication. So almost half of car buyers expect new purchase to be a hybrid or a battery electric vehicle, and this is some research that these guys have done around this sort of expectations of their next vehicle.
Yeah, so this is part of the eBay Motors Group digital touchpoint survey. So the research was conducted over the course of June following the reopening of dealerships across the UK, and it includes the views of 2,000 car buyers, and as you say, almost half of buyers, so that's 44%, expect their next car to be either battery electric or hybrid, with male buyers showing greater intent to go electric. Now, the appetite for making the transition to battery electric is driven by buyers aged under 34 and is strongest in households with incomes in excess of £90,000. So nearly a third of buyers, that's 29%, expect their next car to be hybrid, and 15% expect it to be electric. So that's where that headline figure of 44% comes from. And interestingly, I mean, I found this particularly interesting. Although petrol remains the first choice of fuel for most buyers at 39%, considering their next car, that preference has actually declined by 10% since 2020. So 10%, that's actually the biggest year-on-year decline for any fuel, while diesel is the choice of just 16.5 buyers. But that 16.5 buyers actually equate pretty closely to electric. So with 15.4% saying that they're considering electric. So we're on a sort of tipping point there between diesel and electric.
Definitely. And I think the new vehicle registration market share is also reflecting that similar tipping point towards alternative and battery electric vehicles over that diesel market share. So, diesel is obviously dropping in terms of popularity, and as you say there, Curtis, petrol is also doing so. And there's a quote in here from Dermot Keller, of head of marketing and research at eBay Motors, that says with climate change and environmental considerations high on the national agenda, especially in the light of the government's pledge towards the net zero emissions and the UK hosting the COP26 conference in October. Is it the COP26?
COP26.
COP26 is the better pronunciation of it. So it's encouraging that so many buyers are giving serious consideration to battery electric vehicles and hybrids for the next car purchase. So we are at this change point, aren't we? And maybe that, we will start to see some stabilisation of electric vehicles very soon.
Yeah, and when it comes to adoption by geographical region, London has the highest percentage of buyers intending to purchase electric, so that's 29%, and hybrid at 34%, and the lowest expecting to buy diesel at just 5%, and that's very much with consumers factoring in the expansion of London's ultra-low emission zone in October, so that's very much focusing minds there.
Definitely.
So you're listening to All the Chatter That Matters on Motor Trade Radio, brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand wherever you are on your podcast feed.
So remaining with electric vehicles, that Arnold Clark, a great story in AM Online here, that we're obviously invited to the opening, and Arnold Clark wants a second EV innovation centre in England this time. So this is on the back of an opening of an electric vehicle innovation centre, that the first in Scotland, and obviously AM were invited to a VIP launch evening for its new 5 million innovation centre up in Glasgow there, attended by 60 guests, and the chief executive and group marketing director Eddie Hawthorne stated plans were being formulated to extend the concept south of the border, which was obviously in response to a question asked by AM.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, this, and I do actually know this, the location of this business, because it's on the former Phoenix Car Company dealership on Dumbarton Road. So it's a purpose-built centre. It's cost £5 million worth of investment, and I guess the interesting thing about it is, you can't go there to buy a car. This is purely about education, and I'm guessing that a typical scenario will be a customer goes into an Arnold Clark dealership, is asking questions about going EV, going hybrid, going plug-in hybrid, and they're possibly directed or advised to go to the innovation centre, because everything you need to know about going EV, going hybrid, going plug-in can be explained to you there, and there'll be cars there that you can look at, and importantly, experts on hand that can talk you through what's best for your specific needs.
Yeah, and it's a great idea, and we know, I mean, it is mentioned in the story about Arnold Clark's Product Geniuses, and they launched that concept many years ago, that they had these team of employees in the showroom, that their job wasn't about selling vehicles. Their job was as it is, to become product geniuses, and to be all knowledgeable about all the cars within the business. And if they didn't have an answer, then they could ask one of their colleague product geniuses for the answer. So a great concept, and I think one thing is clear with electric vehicles, particularly in the used electric vehicle sector, because we know that the manufacturers do a lot of work around knowledge and information on new electric vehicles, but what is clear is the knowledge isn't there necessarily for used electric vehicles. So I think it's a great idea for Arnold Clark's doing this, and that it removes that sales pressure. This centre is about the consumer being able to go there. I suspect there will be vehicles on display for viewing and test driving, a choice of electric vehicles from across the Arnold Clark business at multi-franchises, where the customer can, get to understand more about what vehicle they need, what would be good for them, because they may have to, as you said earlier, Curtis, on the previous story there, that some of them will be forced into electric through zoning emissions and things like this, that they have to make that transition to electric, and they may not be that knowledgeable. They may not know what vehicle they do need to suit their driving behaviour. So I think it's a great idea, and like I say, I suspect, as they've said there, that they are looking at bringing one south of the border. So I wonder where they're going to put one in England.
Yeah, and although it was the official opening last week, this site has been open for a little while, and the story does say that around 100 members of the public considering switching from ICE to electric visit the innovation centre every week. So in terms of footfall, that's not bad going at all.
No, it isn't. And next story is kind of talking a little bit about the what we mentioned with the Financial Times story around the new vehicle market, but this is coming from Liverpool Business News. Is that the first one? I think that's the first time on the show, isn't it? So you've dug this one out, haven't you, Curtis? You found this one.
Yeah, and thanks to Auto Retail Agenda, because they actually flagged it up in their weekend bulletin. So this is I think this is based on a leak that the Liverpool Business News got hold of, and of course it's of interest to Liverpool Business News because of the Halewood factory in Merseyside even, where the Discovery and Range Rover Evoque built. And the story is, as I say, it's based on a briefing note that JLR sent out to leasing firms, and which highlighted the problems in this supply chain that we've been talking about for what seems like months now. And they do directly quote from it. So it's saying that it will potentially affect the E-Pace, the Discovery, Discovery Sport, Range Rover Evoque, and of course the Defender. So the piece, the quote is that although these models can remain open for quoting and ordering on your systems, if you choose, your supplying retailer will not be in a position to accept orders for these derivatives due to extended lead times. So that really is laying it out to the leasing companies that are buying these vehicles.
And as you say, I mean, this is very much now going into 2022 there, and we've been talking about that, whether it's going to be Q1, Q2. I have heard reports from certain franchise businesses that in certain models, not necessarily JLR, but the consumers are willing to wait. Some of the lead times are going out till Feb, March, April, May, June of next year for some product, and the consumer's still willing to place the order and wait for that vehicle. So the order take, albeit it's not going to hit September, October for the retailers, and that's going to be an interesting one when we start looking at the September for performance for new vehicle registrations. But it seems that consumers are willing to wait for some of these new cars, the ones that still want to stay in the new car market, other than the ones that are now switching to used as per the Financial Times story earlier. So one that we'll keep an eye on. But it does add into the story here around the JLR that in late July the company revealed pre-tax losses of 110 million for the 3 months to June of the 30th of this year, from revenues of around 5 billion. So it has put the blame purely on the disruption caused by the microchip semiconductor shortages, and they do quote that they do expect this to worsen before it does get better. So a bit of a stark warning there coming out of JLR.
Yeah, and potentially it could affect 53 of its models. So that is a high number. So 53 models, potentially with a waiting in excess of 1 year.
Yeah. So the final story of this week is the one that we sort of touched on earlier. So you've got a petrol vehicle pre-2011. And that does come with a caveat. Still double check if your vehicle will accept it or not. Or if you've got a lawnmower of a certain model or type, you do need to think twice about what petrol you are choosing at the next forecourt, because it could be bad for your vehicle or your lawnmower.
Yes. And I mean, this is all about awareness or lack of it, because the RSC have done some research and they found 24% of motorists are unaware of the changes, while 27% do not know if their car is compatible. So the government has actually set up a website whereby you can tap in your registration number and it will tell you which fuel you should be putting in. But apparently there is a caveat there. They don't accept responsibility if they've got the wrong model and pointing you to the wrong pump. But this is the rollout of the E10 fuel, which will replace E5. So it has 5% more ethanol, so that's where the E10 comes from. E5 will still be available as super unleaded and can be, I think owners of certainly classic cars and pre-2011 cars are being advised to use super unleaded E5, which is more expensive. But if they do use E10, then potentially they could see damage to plastics, metals, and seals.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, it was kind of, I mean, this broke the other day, didn't it? That, it's not been on anybody's radar. Nobody's really talking about it. As you say there's a government website that has been set up. But, many people weren't aware of the change and that it was coming. So I think this is, like you say, this is a story in the BBC News there. But essentially, as you said there, Curtis, it's the RAC are warning that motorists should check which fuel they should be putting in their vehicle, and if there is a question, then you need to be putting super unleaded in anyway, or the new E10 fuel in your petrol vehicle, or I don't know how you're going to check your lawnmower, Curtis. In fairness, I don't think.
Well, I have been doing some research on this, and I don't accept any responsibility for anyone listening to this, but I think you do need to use super unleaded in lawnmowers.
Yeah, because I'm not sure the government will set up a website for your lawnmower, will they, Curtis?
Sadly, no.
But on a very, very serious note, this can be damaging to the vehicle, so do check it out. Do check and for the dealers listening this morning, please do advise your customers to the right fuel that they should be using on their petrol purchases.
That's a good point, actually. If you are selling cars older than 2011, then do make customers aware of that.
So a jam-packed show again, some big headlines and very much led by Cazoo for two reasons this week, and they've certainly hit the headlines in social media feeds as well on the back of both the announcements of last Friday on going to the New York Stock Exchange, and then obviously the subsequent acquisition of Kazana there. So I'm sure as those stories come out, we'll feed them through to you. Please do, as always, head over to the media sites that we talk about, AM and Car Dealer, BBC News, etc., and even Liverpool Business News now, for more stories and more details around those that we've covered this week. But as we say, hopefully those listening have had a reasonable first start to the month of September. I'm sure we'll be looking out for the new plates. Is it 71 plate? On the roads?
And I haven't seen one yet.
I've not been out, so I'll have a look when I do go outside at some point this weekend. But have a great weekend, everybody. Good luck with everything, and we'll be back again next week as always.
So that's all for now. You've been listening to the weekly Motor Trade Radio podcast, brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. Many thanks for joining us for all the chatter that matters. We're back next weekend with our take on what's happening in the car retailing sector. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.